The courtroom went silent when Officer Lauren Doyle pointed at Marcus Carter, calling him a threat, a liar, a danger to society. The crowd believed her, until one calm question froze the room. "You never checked who I was, did you?" In that moment, the proud officer, who thought she owned the truth, was about to learn she'd accused a decorated FBI special agent. How does justice sound when the wrong man is on trial? If this story stirs something in you, hit like and share. Let's uncover what really happened that day. The courtroom was supposed to be quiet, respectful. But when the speakers cracked and a woman's voice blared, the air turned electric. "People like you always think you know your rights." Every head turned. Judge Reynolds slammed his gavel down hard enough to echo off the walls. "Turn that off." Now the room froze. Officer Lauren Doyle went pale, her mouth half open, caught mid-breath. Across from her, Marcus Carter, a black man in his 40s wearing a dark gray suit, didn't flinch. He just sat there calm, steady, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. A few hours earlier, Marcus had walked through courthouse security, the metallic buzz of the scanner humming around him. The guard ran the detector up and down his body twice, frowning as if looking for trouble. "Defendant?" the man muttered, squinting at the paperwork. "You don't look like one." Marcus smiled faintly. "That's the point." He picked up his briefcase and kept walking. The calm in his steps wasn't arrogance, it was something else. A man who's carried truth long enough to know how heavy it gets. Inside the small waiting room, his attorney Ethan Brooks paced back and forth. Young, sharp, but nervous. His hands shook as he flipped through a folder. "If the judge refuses the recording," Ethan said under his breath, "we're done. They'll bury you under her badge." Marcus looked up slowly. "Then we make the truth undeniable." His voice was calm, almost too calm, and that only made Ethan more anxious. Earlier that morning, Marcus had sat alone in his apartment. The blinds were half drawn. Sunlight cut across an old photograph. On the table, his father in uniform, smiling proudly beside a patrol car. Next to it, a tarnished badge and a folded letter marked "Internal Suspension, 1989. Marcus touched the photo gently. "They took your badge, Dad," he whispered, "but they won't take my silence." He placed the photo down and zipped up his jacket. The day was waiting, and so was the truth. Outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered behind barricades. Signs waved "Justice has no color" and "Truth over power." Camera crews shouted questions, their voices mixing with the city's noise. Then Officer Lauren Doyle arrived, crisp uniform, dark glasses, confident stride. Reporters swarmed her immediately. "Officer Doyle, how are you feeling about today's hearing? Do you expect a conviction?" She smiled like someone used to winning. "Justice will speak for itself." To the press, she was the hero cop, the woman who had stopped a violent man. But when she passed Marcus in the hallway, her smile vanished. She leaned in just close enough for him to hear, "You'll regret this." Marcus didn't answer. He just watched her walk away, every step echoing like a warning. Minutes later, the courtroom filled with tension, so thick it felt alive. The audience leaned forward, reporters ready, cameras flashing before the judge ordered them down. Doyle sat tall, hand resting near her badge, eyes locked on Marcus, the man she'd accused. Ethan whispered, "She's playing confident. Don't let it get to you." Marcus simply nodded. His gaze never left her. When the clerk called the case, Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. "Officer Doyle, please begin your statement." Lauren Doyle stood, her voice sharp, polished, and rehearsed. "Your Honor, I feared for my safety that night." The defendant resisted arrest, used aggressive language, and she stopped. Somewhere in the room, a soft static hummed from a small speaker. Then suddenly, "People like you always think you know your rights." The same voice, her voice. The sound sliced through the room like glass. Reporters gasped. One woman covered her mouth. Doyle froze, staring at the bench, her confidence leaking away second by second. Judge Reynolds pounded the gavel again. "Who's playing that? Turn it off immediately." But it was too late. Everyone had heard it. Marcus didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink. He turned slightly toward Ethan and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Now they've heard her truth, before mine." Ethan stared at him wide-eyed. For a moment, even he wasn't sure if Marcus had planned that or if fate had simply stepped in. The silence after was heavier than any argument. Lauren Doyle's hands trembled just a little as she reached for her water. Judge Reynolds adjusted his glasses, his tone colder now. "Officer Doyle," he said slowly, "we'll address this audio issue shortly. Continue, if you can." Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and the courtroom could feel it. Something in her armor had finally begun to break. Marcus sat quietly, eyes steady, face unreadable. But inside, he could feel his pulse rise, not from anger, but from relief. After weeks of lies and humiliation, the first crack in the wall had appeared, and he wasn't going to stop until the whole thing came down. The restroom mirror inside the courthouse was spotless, cold bright, and unforgiving. Officer Lauren Doyle leaned close, smoothing her hair into place, her reflection staring back like a rival she needed to conquer. "You deserve this win," she whispered to herself, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. The words echoed against the tiles as if the room was trying to believe her too. The door creaked open. Lieutenant Blake walked in, sleeves rolled, the kind of man who carried authority like a weapon. He glanced at her through the mirror, his tone flat and measured. "Stick to the script, Doyle. No tears. No guilt." Doyle straightened her uniform, her badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light. "I know," she said confidently. He looked like another mouthy civilian. Didn't even check his ID. Blake smirked. "Good. That's how you stay clean. Keep it about procedure, not emotion." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "And remember, the department's watching this one." Doyle's eyes met his in the mirror. "So is everyone else." The door shut, leaving her alone again. She fixed her collar, took a deep breath, and smiled. The kind of smile that hides panic under layers of pride. Flashback, the night before. The glow of her patrol car's dashboard painted her face in cold blue light. The body cam footage played for a moment, Marcus's calm voice, her own shouting the struggle. Her thumb hovered over the delete button. Her pulse hammered in her ears. "No one needs to see this," she whispered, pressing it. The screen blinked, the file disappeared, and the silence that followed felt heavier than any arrest she'd ever made. A message buzzed on her phone almost instantly. "Blake Union has your back." She leaned back in the driver's seat, staring into the dark parking lot. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. Then she whispered again, "I did what I had to." But even she didn't sound convinced. Morning came, and with it confidence, or at least something that looked like it. Doyle strode down the courthouse hallway, heels clicking against marble, reporters already calling her name. "Officer Doyle, do you feel the pressure today? Is this just another routine case?" She paused for half a second, turned toward the cameras and smiled, that public polished smile that said she was untouchable. "It always is," she said before walking on. Flashbulbs popped. She didn't flinch. Inside, though, her stomach twisted. Routine, no. But she couldn't let them see that. As she waited outside the courtroom, a fellow officer, a younger woman, soft voice, leaned close. "Lauren," she murmured, "he's not like the others." Doyle didn't even look up from her phone. "They never are," she replied coolly, scrolling past an article praising her as the officer who stood her ground. She locked her phone, tucked it into her jacket, and stood. A few deep breaths, a final look in the hallway mirror. The reflection staring back looked perfect, pressed, uniform, sharp eyes, no trace of fear. But inside her heart beat a rhythm of defiance and denial. Back in the courtroom, the tension was different now, quieter but thicker. Reporters whispered. Doyle sat near the front, hands folded neatly, face expressionless. Her badge caught the morning light, and for a second, it almost looked like a halo. Judge Reynolds entered. The audience rose, then sat. Ethan Brooks shuffled papers nervously at the defense table. Marcus Carter sat still, too still, the kind of calm that isn't weakness, but warning. He turned his head slightly toward her, eyes steady. That look wasn't anger, it was recognition. As if he could see right through the layers of her training, her excuses, her carefully polished mask. From where I sat, because yes, I was there that morning, you could feel it. The power in the room had started to tilt. Just slightly, but enough for everyone to notice. Lauren Doyle sat taller, chin lifted. But her hands, if you looked close enough, had started to tremble. Marcus leaned toward his lawyer, his voice low but firm. "She didn't even bother to know who I am. And that was the truth that would undo her. Because in her world, he was just another black man to control." But in his world, he was the one person she could never afford to underestimate. The irony was painful. She had spent years studying how to maintain control, how to win every confrontation, every narrative. And now the one lie she told too easily was about to unravel her entire career. But at that moment, she didn't see it yet. She still believed her badge made her untouchable. She still believed the courtroom was hers to command. The perfect officer sat in silence, unaware that perfection was the very thing that was about to destroy her. The courtroom lights hummed softly overhead. You could almost feel the air tighten as the prosecutor, David Sloan, stood up, buttoning his jacket with a confidence that had the weight of the state behind it. He turned toward the jury box, voice firm and deliberate. The people will prove, he began, that the defendant, Marcus Carter, assaulted an officer during a lawful arrest. The evidence will show he was aggressive, uncooperative, and posed a clear threat to public safety. His words landed heavy, rehearsed, the kind of authority people don't question. But from the defense table, Marcus sat still, eyes lowered, fingers clasped tightly together. His calm didn't come from peace, it came from restraint. Then it was Officer Lauren Doyle's turn. She rose from the witness chair with the kind of posture that begged for belief. Her uniform was crisp, her badge gleamed, and her tone carried that familiar righteousness people mistake for truth. I approached the suspect after observing erratic behavior near the intersection of Monroe and State, she said clearly. He smelled of alcohol. When I asked for identification, he refused. He became hostile, resisted arrest, and reached for my firearm. There it was, the official story. The perfect lie neatly folded into a polished report. From where I sat, I could see Marcus's knuckles tighten. His jaw flexed, but he stayed quiet. He looked down almost as if he was trying to breathe through the injustice inch by inch. Across the table, Ethan Brooks, his attorney, scribbled a note fast, his eyes darting between the pages of her report and Marcus's hands. He underlined something, leaned closer to whisper, right hand holster. She claims he grabbed with his left arm. That's physically impossible. Marcus gave a slow nod. He already knew. Doyle continued, her voice unwavering. I feared for my life, she said, the same phrase that's echoed in too many courtrooms, in too many headlines. A low murmur rippled through the back of the courtroom, quiet but sharp. A black woman in the audience shook her head. Another man sighed under his breath. They'd heard it before. They'd lived it before. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat, silencing the crowd. Order in the court. But the energy didn't settle. You could feel the disbelief hanging in the room, thick and alive. Sloan stepped closer to Doyle, pacing slowly, playing the role of the believer. And when Mr. Carter reached for your weapon, he asked, what did you do? Doyle nodded, rehearsed, precise. I used measured force to subdue him. He resisted. I radioed for backup and followed protocol. Ethan leaned back, slightly tapping his pen against his notebook. Protocol. That word again used to cover everything that isn't. He looked at Marcus. She's painting you as a threat. Stay composed. Let her overplay it. Marcus didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence was steady like the calm before a storm. Then came the judge's question, simple but cutting. Officer Doyle, Judge Reynolds asked, was your body camera operational during this encounter? The courtroom stilled. Doyle blinked once, twice before answering. It malfunctioned, Your Honor. A murmur rolled through the benches again. Someone in the crowd muttered almost loud enough for everyone to hear, always does. Doyle's head snapped up for a second, eyes scanning the room. The moment cracked her composure just slightly. She swallowed, her hand twitching near the badge on her chest. Judge Reynolds gave a pointed nod. Continue. Ethan took a note in calm, deliberate strokes, writing down every word, every pause. He looked at Marcus, whispering, she's building a pattern of coincidence. That'll break later. Marcus finally lifted his head, eyes locking on Doyle. It wasn't anger in that look, it was something quieter, colder. A man staring at the truth, wearing another person's face. And in that brief, silent exchange, something shifted. Doyle's voice faltered mid-sentence. Just a tremor, barely noticeable, but it was there. The arrogance from earlier began to thin. Ethan leaned slightly forward, pretending to jot another note, but really watching her. Every blink, every nervous swallow. And when Doyle reached for her glass of water, her hand wasn't as steady as before. That's when Ethan circled a line in red ink on his notepad, a tiny inconsistency she didn't even realize she'd just given him. Her report said Marcus reached for her right side holster after she cuffed him. But her statement just now placed the grab before the cuffs. One tiny shift in timeline, but in law, that's all it takes for truth to start bleeding through lies. Marcus didn't react. He just looked at her with the same calm that unnerved her more than any outburst ever could. The audience couldn't see the note Ethan had written, but they could feel the tension growing. Something about the story didn't fit. You could feel the whole room starting to sense it, like a single thread beginning to unravel a tightly woven lie. Sloan smiled faintly, unaware his witness was already sinking. He turned to the judge. No further questions at this time. Doyle exhaled in relief and stepped down, but she avoided Marcus's eyes this time. That confidence from before, the smirk, the sure steps, the practiced tone, all of it seemed thinner now, almost brittle. Ethan leaned toward Marcus and whispered, "We've got her. Just one more push, and the cracks will show." Marcus nodded, his voice low and even. She already knows they've started. Then he looked back at her as she returned to her seat, her shoulders stiff, pretending not to notice the whispers rippling behind her. Everyone in that courtroom, even the ones who wanted to believe her, could feel it. Something was off, and for the first time, Officer Lauren Doyle didn't look like the perfect officer anymore. When Ethan Brooks stood up, the whole courtroom changed. The young defense attorney wasn't the loud type he didn't need to be. His calm carried something sharper than anger certainty. He buttoned his jacket, stepped toward the witness stand, and said clear as glass, "Officer Doyle, how many times has your body cam failed specifically with black suspects?" The room went silent. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Doyle's head snapped up. "Objection," she blurted before the prosecutor could. But Sloan was right behind her. "Objection, Your Honor." Argumentative Judge Reynolds didn't even blink. "Overruled. Answer the question." You could see the shift in her face, the kind that starts behind the eyes and spreads down like ice melting. I don't keep count, Doyle," said finally, her voice just a touch too defensive. Ethan tilted his head, one brow raised. Then maybe internal affairs should. He took one slow step closer, never breaking eye contact. "You said Mr. Carter grabbed your gun, correct?" "Yes." "Which side of your body is your holster?" "On my right," she answered. Ethan's tone didn't change, but his words started cutting deeper. "And you testified earlier that Mr. Carter's hands were cuffed. Behind his back, correct?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." He let the silence stretch for a moment, just long enough for everyone to do the math. "So," Ethan said quietly while handcuffed, "Mr. A. Carter somehow reached across your body, to your right side, and tried to grab your weapon." Doyle blinked. "He's strong." That drew a few whispers in the gallery. Someone actually laughed, quickly stifled by the bailiff's glare. Ethan didn't laugh. He just looked down at his notes, then back at her. "Stronger than your logic, apparently." The courtroom erupted. Sloan jumped to his feet. "Objection." "The defense is mocking the officer." Ethan turned toward the judge, his tone steady. "No, Your Honor. I'm exposing contradictions." Judge Reynolds didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, motioning for Ethan to continue. The gavel never fell because the truth didn't need help being loud. Lauren Doyle tried to steady her breathing. Her fingers clutched the edge of the witness stand, the paper in her hand, trembling just enough to show it. Her gaze darted toward Sloan, but he avoided eye contact. Ethan's voice softened, but it didn't lose its edge. "You're trained to observe details, aren't you?" "Officer, yes. And yet your report and your testimony today disagree on the timing of events?" She looked confused. "They do not." "Oh, they do," Ethan replied, reaching for the folder on his desk. He flipped a page, his movements deliberate, calm, like someone peeling layers off a lie. "In your written report, you stated that Mr. Carter was restrained before he reached for your weapon. But under oath, you just said the opposite. Which version should this court believe?" I may have misspoken," Doyle said quickly, her voice thinning. "Misspoken," Ethan repeated almost to himself. "That happens. But it usually doesn't happen on the record in two different documents under two different oaths." You could feel the audience leaning in now. The room wasn't breathing evenly anymore. Sweat beaded at Doyle's temple. She took a sip of water, her hands shaking. The sound of the glass tapping the wooden rail echoed in the silence. Ethan waited until she looked back up at him. Then he stepped closer, one final piece of evidence in hand. "Officer Doyle," he said, his voice low and careful. "You said you were standing with your left side toward the suspect when he reached for your holster, correct?" She nodded quickly, eager for a question that sounded safe. Yes, that's right. Ethan's lips pressed into a faint smile. Not smug, not cruel, just certain. He turned toward the judge. Permission to present visual evidence, Your Honor. Granted. Ethan held up a printed photo for the court to see, a still frame from Doyle's own patrol car dash cam captured before her body cam conveniently failed. In the picture, she stood facing Marcus, but her watch was clearly visible on her right wrist, not her left, proving her stance had been the opposite of what she described. That meant her entire positioning, her entire story, was impossible. A wave of murmurs broke through the courtroom. One juror's eyebrows shot up. Someone in the back whispered, "She lied." Even Sloan looked uneasy now. Ethan's voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "Officer Doyle." He said, "If you can't tell which side you were standing on, how can you be certain of anything that happened that night?" Doyle didn't answer. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel it. She looked down at the photo, then at her trembling hands. And that perfect posture she carried all morning, the pride the poise it cracked. Her shoulders sank. Her eyes darted to Sloan again, desperate for rescue, but he just shuffled, his paper's jaw clenched. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. "Officer Doyle," he said, not unkindly but with the weight of authority, "you may take a moment." But it was too late. The damage was done. Ethan turned back toward the defense table, his eyes meeting Marcus's. No words, just a nod. Because everyone in that courtroom knew what they had just seen. The official story, the one built on protocol and pride, had finally started to crumble. And Officer Lauren Doyle, the so-called perfect cop, was standing right in the middle of her own collapse. When Ethan Brooks rose again, the room was already restless whispers bouncing from one bench to another. Everyone thought the same thing: the defense was cornered. But Ethan didn't look defeated. He looked ready. He stepped forward, buttoning his jacket, his voice carrying calm authority that instantly quieted the room. "The defense," he said, "calls Marcus Carter to the stand." For half a second, nobody reacted. Then came the ripples, gasps, confused murmurs. Someone even whispered. The defendant, Judge Reynolds, lifted his brows. "Are you sure?" Counselor Ethan nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The truth has waited long enough." That sentence, it hit like a drumbeat. Marcus stood slowly, hands clasped in front of him. No chains, no panic, just quiet resolve. He walked to the witness stand under a sea of stares, some skeptical, some hostile, most curious. The bailiff approached. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Marcus's answer was simple: "I do." Then he sat back, straight voice, calm but deep enough to fill the room. "Please state your full name and occupation for the record," Ethan said. Marcus looked directly at the jury, not with arrogance, but with the calm of a man who's been through worse storms than this one. "Special Agent Marcus Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. 23 years of service. Recipient of the Director's Medal of Valor and the Distinguished Service Ribbon." You could have heard a pin drop. Every whisper died. Every shuffle stopped. Even Judge Reynolds blinked twice before adjusting his glasses. Lauren Doyle, the same officer who had stared him down with such certainty, looked like the floor had been pulled out from under her. You're FBI," she said, barely audible. Marcus turned his head toward her, his expression unreadable. "Decorated, retired. I spent most of my career investigating public corruption." He paused just long enough for the weight of that word corruption to hang in the air. "I knew harassment when I saw it." The courtroom buzzed again, people whispering fast like a chain reaction of disbelief. Prosecutor Sloan jumped to his feet. "Objection. This line of testimony is irrelevant and self-serving." Judge Reynolds gave a firm look. "Overruled. The court will hear him." Sloan clenched his jaw. "So you're telling this court you didn't identify yourself as law enforcement?" That night, Marcus turned toward him calmly. "I didn't need to. I identified myself as a citizen exercising his rights, and that was enough to make me a target." Sloan's tone sharpened. "You used your position to entrap an officer?" Marcus's answer came like a hammer wrapped in silk. "No, I used my rights to survive one." The words landed so hard even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment. Ethan walked closer to the evidence table. Your Honor, he said the defense would like to reintroduce the recorded audio, the full unedited version. Judge Reynolds nodded. Proceed. Ethan connected the device to the speaker system. Static filled the air, then the familiar click of door opening, footsteps, and Lauren Doyle's voice. People like you always think you know your rights. A pause. Then Marcus's recorded voice, steady, calm, but firm. And you always forget your oath. The sound alone was enough to make everyone shift in their seats. You could feel the unease building, the realization that her words weren't a mistake. They were the truth slipping out from behind the badge. Sloan scrambled. This could be fabricated. Anyone can splice a file together. Before he could finish, Ethan raised his hand. Mr. Carter, please explain how this recording was stored. Marcus nodded. Encrypted, time-stamped. Automatically uploaded to the Bureau's audit cloud the same night. He turned slightly toward the audience. Every FBI-issued recorder sends data directly to a secure federal server. Once uploaded, it can't be edited or deleted. Not even by me. Ethan looked to the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, we have a Bureau technician here to verify. A man in a dark gray suit stepped forward, credentials in hand. The file's metadata confirms its authenticity. No edits, no tampering. Judge Reynolds leaned back, expression unreadable, but you could see the shift in his posture. The lie had finally met the truth head-on. Across the aisle, Lauren Doyle's face drained of color. She gripped the edge of her table like it might keep her upright. For the first time since the trial began, her confidence was gone. Her lips moved, no sound came out. Sloan turned to her sharply. Officer Doyle, is there anything you'd like to clarify? Her eyes darted toward him, then toward Marcus, and she froze. Because Marcus wasn't gloating, he wasn't angry. He just looked at her, calm, steady, merciful. And that was somehow worse. The gallery exploded with whispers. Reporters scribbled notes, phones buzzed quietly under benches, and a woman in the back whispered, "He's FBI." She lied to the FBI. Ethan stood beside Marcus, his voice quiet but cutting. The defense rests, Your Honor. But the truth didn't. It lingered alive, undeniable, pulsing through the courtroom like oxygen, finally rushing into a suffocating room. Judge Reynolds tapped his pen on the desk, breaking the silence. We'll take a 10-minute recess. The gavel struck once, but the sound didn't bring order this time. It brought chaos. As people stood, you could hear the flood of reactions, some gasps, some disbelief, and more than a few words you couldn't repeat in front of a judge. Lauren Doyle stayed seated, staring at nothing, her pulse visible in her throat, her hands gripping the wood until her knuckles turned white. Marcus rose slowly, buttoning his jacket again. He didn't look at her, didn't look at the crowd. He just turned to Ethan and said softly, "Now they know who was really on trial." Ethan nodded, still stunned. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and it wasn't you." When Judge Reynolds finally returned, the courtroom had changed. The energy, the balance of power, the silent weight, all of it had shifted. The audience wasn't looking at Marcus like a defendant anymore. They were looking at him the way people look at a man who just exposed something much bigger than himself. And sitting across from him, Officer Lauren Doyle, once the hero cop, looked smaller than anyone had ever seen her. Her hands trembled, her face pale, and when she tried to stand, she almost lost her balance. Because in one moment, one sentence, one recording, her entire version of truth had collapsed, and every single person in that courtroom felt it. When the court reconvened, the air felt different. No one said it out loud, but you could feel it. Something had shifted. The truth was no longer hiding. It was clawing its way into the open. Ethan Brooks stood again, holding a thin stack of papers in one hand. His tone was calm, but his words carried the kind of weight that could topple careers. Your Honor, he began, the defense has submitted evidence provided by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically the Bureau's Internal Audit Division. The Bureau's been auditing the Chicago Police Department's internal affairs for the past 6 months. That single sentence landed like a thunderclap. A ripple of shock ran through the gallery. Judge Reynolds leaned forward slightly, brows raised. Sloan's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. Ethan turned toward the gray-suited technician who had verified the recording earlier. Mr. Hayes, would you please explain your findings to the court? The man stepped up to the stand, opening a folder thick with log reports. His voice was steady, technical, and precise. Our analysis shows that Officer Doyle's body camera was manually disabled 3 separate times that evening, each instance occurring during moments of verbal escalation. Gasps. Someone in the crowd whispered, 3 times. Ethan nodded. To be clear, sir, are you saying this was not a malfunction? No, sir. It was a deliberate action. The device was powered down by the user. Each shutdown was followed by a manual reactivation once the situation had de-escalated. You could see Doyle's composure fading piece by piece. Her shoulders slumped. Her gaze dropped to the table. She didn't even try to deny it. Ethan didn't push her. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. He turned to Sloan, voice low but cutting. Would the prosecution like to comment on this? Sloan's lips parted, then closed again. For once, the man who'd had every answer had none. He simply adjusted his tie, staring at his notes like they could rewrite reality. Judge Reynolds looked between them. Counselor Sloan cleared his throat. The state reserves its right to review the data. It was a hollow defense, and everyone in the room knew it. Ethan reached for another document. His tone was quieter now, not angry, just deliberate. Your Honor, this audit uncovered additional data. 12 misconduct complaints filed against multiple officers over the past 2 years. Every single one was dismissed by the same superior officer. He turned the page toward the judge. Lieutenant Charles Blake. The name hit the courtroom like a crack of lightning. Even Doyle flinched. Ethan continued. Each dismissal bore his signature, including Officer Doyle's prior internal reviews. Judge Reynolds frowned. Mr. Brooks, are you suggesting a pattern of systemic interference? Ethan didn't smile, but there was something resolute in his tone. I'm not suggesting, Your Honor. I'm proving it. From the witness stand, Doyle's voice broke the silence, soft trembling. He told me to lie, she whispered. The entire room turned to her. Her words hung there, fragile and raw. Sloan looked up, startled. Officer Doyle. But she didn't stop. He said if I told the truth, I'd lose my badge. That I'd look weak. That no one would believe me anyway. Ethan didn't interrupt. Neither did Marcus. It wasn't about humiliation anymore. It was about watching the wall of silence begin to crack. Marcus finally spoke, his voice deep but calm. Accountability isn't betrayal, he said. It's redemption. Doyle met his eyes, and for the first time there was no defiance left in hers. Only guilt. And maybe in relief. The technician stepped forward again. There's one more thing, Your Honor, he said, handing a printed report to the judge. A timestamp log from that night confirming that the body cam's third deactivation happened after Officer Doyle's radio call. Judge Reynolds looked up sharply, meaning she shut it off after backup arrived. Yes, sir. The implication was clear. She hadn't just made a bad call, she had erased the evidence. The room buzzed with tension. Ethan didn't have to say another word. Judge Reynolds removed his glasses, folding them carefully before speaking. This court, he said slowly, cannot and will not ignore what has been presented. He turned to Doyle. Officer Lauren Doyle, effective immediately, you are suspended from duty pending a full federal investigation. The words hit like a hammer. Doyle's face crumpled. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips trembled, eyes welling with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. Behind her, Lieutenant Blake, sitting in the back row, frowned deeply, his jaw locking. His hands clasped tightly together like he knew his turn was coming. The judge continued, his tone stern but not cruel. This is not about vengeance. It's about accountability. This court will coordinate with federal authorities to review all associated cases under your name. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. Once, twice, but no one cheered. No one clapped. It wasn't a victory anyone wanted to celebrate. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment. You could almost feel the exhaustion in his stillness, not from the fight, but from carrying truth alone for so long. When he opened them, his voice was quiet but strong enough to reach the back row. Justice doesn't celebrate, he said softly. It restores. And for the first time in that courtroom, everyone, even those who doubted him, believed it. You could tell she wasn't the same woman who'd walked into that courtroom hours ago. Officer Lauren Doyle sat there, eyes unfocused, hands trembling against the table. The mask had fallen. All that confidence, all that polished control gone. What was left was something raw, human. And then, almost as if the silence around her pulled it out, the story began to surface, not through defense, not through anger, but through memory. 5 years earlier, back then she'd been different, young, sharp, believed every word they fed her about justice and keeping order. She still saluted with pride, still thought the badge meant something pure. Her superior, Lieutenant Blake, had called her into his office one late Friday. The blinds were half closed, the smell of burnt coffee heavy in the air. 4 arrests a week, he told her flatly, not even looking up from his report. She frowned. Sir, that's not always realistic. He cut her off with a laugh that had no warmth. You want to stay on the street? Then make the numbers. You think the department pays you to hesitate? Lauren had stood there, jaw tight, her heart pounding, with something between fear and defiance. She walked out that day and told herself she'd never compromise the job. But that promise didn't last long. A week later, she'd arrested a young black college student outside a convenience store. He matched the description, she said. He resisted, she wrote. But the truth, he was scared. And she was angry. Angry because the numbers weren't adding up. Because the system had taught her that guilt could be measured by skin tone and circumstance. The boy lost his scholarship after the charge. Lauren told herself it wasn't her fault. He'll bounce back, she'd whispered that night. But she knew better. It was the first time she'd seen fear in someone's eyes and realized it was her reflection in it. Weeks turned into years. She stopped asking questions, stopped doubting the reports that didn't make sense. Every arrest, every pat on the back numbed her a little more. Then one afternoon, Blake passed her in the hallway, slapped her shoulder, and said, "Nice work, Doyle." She smiled back, but her eyes were hollow. That was the moment she would later realize that something inside her had gone silent, the part of her that used to care why she wore the badge. Now, back in that courtroom, surrounded by everything she'd built and broken, that silence was gone. All that was left was guilt. Lauren looked across the aisle to Marcus Carter. He was still seated, calm as ever, watching her the same way he had all along, not as an enemy, not even as a victim, but as a mirror. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "You're everything I wanted to be." Marcus didn't flinch. Then start by being honest. The simplicity of it, no lecture, no judgment, hit harder than any accusation ever could. Ethan slid a document across the table toward her. It was the official statement, the confession, the kind of paper that could end a career, or maybe just maybe begin redemption. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then with shaky hands, she picked up the pen. The entire room went still, the kind of stillness that feels sacred, like everyone understood something irreversible was happening. The pen touched paper. Her signature, neat, deliberate, curled across the line. No excuses, no hesitation. When she placed the pen down, the sound was almost too loud. 2 uniformed officers approached. Neither looked smug. Neither looked cruel. They simply did their duty. As they stepped beside her, Doyle stood. Her knees wobbled, but she didn't resist. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I never wanted it to end like this." Marcus rose too quietly, almost instinctively. He watched as the cuffs clicked around her wrists, the same sound that had once meant power to her. Now it just meant consequence. She turned slightly as they guided her toward the aisle. Her eyes met his. For a moment, everything else, the courtroom, the press, the whispers, disappeared. Marcus leaned forward just enough for her to hear his voice, low, steady. "You can still be human." It wasn't forgiveness. It was something deeper, permission to change. That line broke whatever strength she had left. Her lips quivered, and for the first time the tears came. The officers paused at the door, giving her one last second. She turned back toward Marcus, her voice trembling, but clear enough for the room to hear. "Thank you, Agent Carter." The way she said it, not with pride, not with fear, but with something like peace, made even the reporters go quiet. Marcus just nodded, nothing more. Because he understood that redemption wasn't about applause or sympathy. It was about facing the truth and not running from it anymore. When the door closed behind her, the silence lingered like an echo, heavy, haunting, and strangely hopeful. You could almost feel the entire courtroom exhale at once. Not because justice had finally won, but because for the first time, someone in that system had chosen truth over survival. Marcus sat down again, hands folded, eyes lowered. Not triumphant, not proud. Just still. And if you look closely, you could see it in his expression, a trace of sorrow for the woman who had once believed in the same justice he'd spent his life defending. The courtroom had fallen into that strange quiet, the kind that comes right before something irreversible happens. Judge Reynolds sat tall behind the bench, his eyes scanning the room, his tone controlled, but heavy. Ethan Brooks stood at the center, holding a folder he hadn't opened yet. He wasn't smiling, but you could tell he knew what was about to come. He took a breath, looked toward the judge, and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Your Honor, per federal warrant issued this morning, Lieutenant Charles Blake is under arrest." The words hit like a thunderclap. You could feel the wave ripple through the courtroom, gasps, murmurs. Phones raised halfway before reporters even remembered they weren't supposed to record. Blake froze where he sat, disbelief turning quickly into fury. His face went red, his voice rising as he stood. "You planned this," he shouted, pointing toward Marcus. "You planned this with him." Marcus didn't move. He just looked up slowly, calm as always, the faintest hint of tired empathy in his expression. "No," he said evenly. "You planned it for years. I just stopped pretending not to notice." The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open and two men in dark suits entered, badges flashing gold under the light. FBI. The energy shifted instantly. No one moved, no one breathed. The agents stepped forward, walking straight down the aisle. Their movements were quiet, controlled, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Blake laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "This is ridiculous. You think you can turn this on me?" But before anyone could answer, another voice broke the silence, soft but clear, trembling, yet powerful. It was Lauren Doyle, still handcuffed. She stood just behind the defense table, tears streaking down her face, her voice cracking but loud enough to echo. "He made me lie," she said. "He told me truth, ruins careers. He said if I didn't follow orders, I'd be the next one investigated." Her words landed like a confession and a weapon all at once. Every reporter scribbled at once, flashes of realization, crossing faces in the gallery. Blake turned toward her, eyes wild. "You think this ends with me?" he spat. "You think you're safe now? The system will protect me." Marcus rose from his chair. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade through fog. "It ends with the truth. Simple. Final." The agents reached Blake. Lieutenant Charles Blake once said, reading from a paper, "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice evidence, tampering and perjury under federal statute." They turned him around, the click of metal echoing through the room, the same cold sound that had defined his power for decades, now sealing his downfall. For a moment, the man who had controlled careers, crushed reputations, and rewritten truth looked small, trapped in the very system he'd built to serve himself. He thrashed once, shouting something incoherent about politics and witch hunts, but the agents didn't react. They just led him down the aisle toward the door, and as they passed, Marcus Blake's voice dropped to a hiss. "This isn't over." Marcus met his glare without blinking. "It is when you're the one in chains." When the doors closed behind them, silence filled the space. Not the tense kind this time, but the kind that follows release. Judge Reynolds took a long breath, then picked up his gavel. "This court," he began, "finds no grounds to proceed with the case against Special Agent Marcus Carter." He paused, glancing toward Marcus, the faintest trace of something like respect in his expression. "All charges are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The sound of the gavel hitting the wood was deep, resonant, a single perfect note of closure. The gallery erupted, not in chaos this time, but applause. Spontaneous, heartfelt, unstoppable. People stood, some clapping, some crying, others simply shaking their heads in disbelief. Reporters dropped their pens just to join in. Even Judge Reynolds didn't silence them. He just sat back, watching the rare sight of a courtroom not divided, but united, if only for a moment, by the truth. At the defense table, Ethan exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. He turned to Marcus, his grin small but genuine. "Guess that's it." Marcus nodded, his tone calm. "That's justice, the kind that doesn't shout." He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and glanced across the room. Doyle was still there, head bowed, tears streaming freely now. The cuffs glinted under the harsh fluorescent light, but her expression wasn't defiance anymore. It was something else, relief maybe, the kind that comes after the storm when you finally stop lying to yourself. Marcus walked past her as he headed for the exit. She didn't look up, but as he neared her, shoulders trembled. "Agent Carter?" she whispered, voice breaking. "I'm sorry." Marcus stopped beside her, his face unreadable. He didn't offer comfort, but he didn't offer cruelty either. "You can start fixing it by telling the truth every time to everyone," he said softly. "That's how it begins." Then he stepped away. The applause was still going when Marcus reached the doors. Light streamed through the tall courthouse windows, slanting across his face, golden, blinding, almost surreal, after the grayness of the courtroom. For a second he paused, hand on the door. He looked back, not at the judge, not at the reporters, not even at the woman who had tried to destroy him. He looked at the space itself, the benches, the walls, the flag behind the bench, as if taking one last silent inventory of a place that had seen too much injustice, and finally at least once something right. Then he stepped through the doorway. The light outside hit him full on, bright, sharp, unfiltered. The city noise rushed in car horns, footsteps, the hum of life moving forward. He didn't smile. He didn't wave to the cameras or make a statement. He just walked down the courthouse steps, the wind tugging at his coat, his face calm, but heavy, the face of a man who had won the fight but knew the war was far from over. Behind him, the doors closed slowly, and through the glass, for one brief second, you could still see the reflection of the flag, half in shadow, half in light. Because in that moment, justice hadn't just punished someone, it had survived. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Every headline, every network, every channel that had once doubted him now spoke his name like an echo of justice finally catching up to the truth. Decorated FBI agent exposes police corruption. FBI veteran clears, his name shakes the system. Truth over power. Marcus Carter and the case that changed everything. The world saw triumph, but Marcus Carter, he didn't feel like a hero. He just felt tired. When he pulled into his neighborhood, the familiar streets looked softer in the afternoon light. The same cracked sidewalk, the same front porch where his mother used to wait for him as a boy. Somehow it all felt different now. He climbed the steps slowly, briefcase in hand, and before he could knock, the door opened. His mother stood there, smaller than he remembered, her hair silver, and her eyes full of that knowing warmth only a mother can carry. For a moment, neither spoke. She just looked at him, her hand trembling slightly before reaching up to touch his cheek. "My boy," she whispered, voice breaking. "Your father would have been proud." Marcus tried to answer, but all that came out was a nod. Then she pulled him into her arms, and for the first time in months, he let himself breathe. Later, they sat in the small living room, the same one filled with old photos and the faint smell of cedar and coffee. On the wall hung the framed picture of his father, a police officer in uniform standing tall, smiling wide. Marcus stared at it for a long moment. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think clearing my name would fix everything." His mother looked at him, eyes soft. And now he sighed. "Now I know he didn't teach me to hate the badge, just the hands that stain it." She smiled, a sad, proud kind of smile. "That's how you honor him, Marcus. Not by fighting the system, but by reminding it what it's supposed to be." A knock at the door broke the silence. It was Ethan Brooks, his young lawyer, still in the same wrinkled suit from the trial, but grinning for the first time since it began. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "You earned it." Ethan stepped inside, shaking his head with disbelief. "You know, I've had clients who beat charges before, but you didn't just win, Marcus. You made people believe again." Marcus chuckled softly. "Believe in what, in truth?" Ethan said. "In decency. In the idea that the system might still have a soul left." For a second, neither spoke. The words hung there, heavy but healing. Then Marcus smiled faintly, that quiet smile of a man who's been to the edge and made it back alive. As Ethan left, the house grew quiet again. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, just peaceful. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee, sat back in his father's old chair, and let the weight of it all settle. Then came a soft knock at the door again. The mailman this time. He handed Marcus a plain envelope, no return address, just his name typed neatly across the front. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was delicate, almost unsure. Marcus unfolded it slowly. It was from Lauren Doyle. He read in silence, the words cutting deep, not from anger, but from truth. "You didn't destroy me, Agent Carter. You freed me from who I'd become. I used to believe silence kept me safe. Now I know it only chained me tighter. Maybe justice isn't what happens in court, but what happens inside us when we stop lying. Thank you for reminding me who I was supposed to be." Marcus let out a long breath, his fingers trembling slightly as he folded the letter back into its envelope. He looked up at his father's photo again. The old uniform gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. "You taught me to forgive," Marcus' whispered voice. "Rough, not forget." The words hung in the air, half prayer, half promise. He sat there for a long time after that, the light shifting across the room. Outside, a few kids were riding bikes down the block laughing. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. The world was still moving, still imperfect, but maybe for once a little closer to what it was meant to be. Marcus unfolded the letter one more time, reading that final line again. Then he smiled, eyes glistening with quiet emotion. "Then maybe," he murmured, "we both won." He placed the letter gently inside the photo frame beside his father's picture, not to hide it, but to keep it close where truth belonged. As the sun dipped low, a warm orange glow filled the room, casting long shadows across the walls. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Carter, the man the world called a hero, the man who had fought the system and survived, allowed himself to feel what justice really meant. Not the noise, not the headlines, just peace. 6 months later, the halls of Quantico's FBI Academy echoed with the steady rhythm of boots and purpose. Recruits filled the training room, crisp uniforms, eager faces, notebooks, open pens ready. But when Marcus Carter stepped onto the podium, the energy shifted. It wasn't just respect, it was silence born of reverence. He didn't speak like a man who'd won headlines. He spoke like someone who'd lived through the weight of truth. He looked across the room, then at the small brass badge in his hand, old worn edges, dulled with years of service. And then in a calm, steady tone, he said, "The badge doesn't grant justice. It demands it." Every recruit stopped writing. Those words landed heavier than any textbook or lecture could. Marcus continued, pacing slowly. "It's not power. It's responsibility. It doesn't protect you. It reminds you who you serve." A young woman in the front row nodded, tears welling quietly in her eyes. Somewhere in that moment, the lesson wasn't just about law enforcement, it was about humanity. Later that afternoon, the classroom emptied, but Marcus stayed behind for a while, watching the sunlight spill across the seal on the wall, "Fidelity, bravery, integrity." He smiled faintly. For the first time, those words didn't feel like slogans. They felt earned. Somewhere far away in a quiet state correctional facility, Lauren Doyle sat beneath a window streaked with sunlight. Her uniform wasn't blue anymore, but her posture was straight, her eyes clearer. On the small table before her was a stack of books: Criminal Law, Basic Civil Rights Procedure, Federal Ethics. Across from her sat two younger women, both inmates, listening as she explained something from a page. "You have rights," she said softly. "Knowing them isn't rebellion, it's protection." One of them frowned. "You really think anyone cares?" Lauren smiled sadly. "They will, once we do." She closed the book, the sun cutting across her face like redemption itself. Back in Washington, Ethan Brooks stood behind a podium at a law conference, addressing a room full of judges, prosecutors, and young attorneys. He wasn't the nervous rookie anymore. He spoke with quiet fire. "Justice doesn't survive because of laws," he said. "It survives when truth is louder than pride." A ripple of nods filled the room, and in the back an older man whispered, "That's Carter's lawyer." Ethan didn't hear it, but maybe he didn't need to. Some legacies don't need applause, just continuation. When Marcus left the academy that day, the air was crisp, the kind that carried both memory and renewal. He walked slowly across the courtyard, the sound of flag ropes clinking gently against the pole. The American flag fluttered high above him, sunlight weaving through its folds, the red brighter, the white cleaner. He stopped for a moment and watched it move. Then as he turned toward the parking lot, something caught his eye. A young officer helping an elderly man cross the street outside the academy gates. The officer didn't do it for show. No one was watching except Marcus. He smiled quietly. "That's what the badge was meant for," he murmured. The car door clicked shut, and for a brief second, his reflection stared back at him in the mirror, older, scarred, but finally at peace. As he started the engine, his voice calm, steady, carried softly over the hum of the road. He was handcuffed by lie, but freed by truth. The tires rolled over the familiar pavement past a city that had both betrayed and redeemed him. He didn't fight to destroy the system, the voice continued. He fought to rebuild it. The sun was dipping low now, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Marcus turned a corner, and there it was. The same intersection where it had all begun, where a uniformed officer had once stopped him, accused him, humiliated him. But now the scene was different, calm, quiet, ordinary. A couple of teenagers laughed at a crosswalk. A traffic light blinked red, then green. Marcus slowed down his eyes, tracing the spot. He didn't feel anger anymore. Not even bitterness. Just gratitude for surviving it and for what it taught him. The light turned green. He pressed the accelerator gently, the car gliding forward. Sunlight spilled across his face through the windshield, soft, golden, forgiving. It lit the small FBI pin on his lapel, turning it almost silver in the glow. And for a moment, Marcus Carter smiled, the kind of smile that only comes when you've seen the worst of justice and still believe in it. As the screen fades to black, his voice lingers. One last time, justice doesn't end when the gavel drops. It begins when someone chooses to stand. The sound of wind carries through, calm and steady. Then in white letters over the fading light, inspired by true stories of justice and redemption. Sometimes justice isn't about victory, it's about truth finally being heard. Marcus's story reminds us that integrity, courage, and forgiveness can still light the way even when the system seems dark. Because at the end of the day, justice isn't a headline, it's a heartbeat. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who believes in truth too. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories, where every story is a voice for justice, humanity, and redemption. Your support means the world to us. It keeps our team inspired to create more powerful, meaningful stories that remind us all of what's right. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember why they matter.